She spent 5 years keeping his secrets, the contracts that weren't contracts, the shipments that never appeared on any manifest, the men who disappeared between one phone call and the next. She filed the paperwork. She made the calls. She knew where everybody was buried, figuratively and otherwise. And for 5 years, Kang Tae-hyun looked right through her. Then one Friday evening, she took off her jacket, and the most feared man in South Korea forgot how to breathe. If you want to know what happens when the king finally sees the woman who knew everything, stay until the end. Hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The elevator doors opened at 6:47 on a Friday evening, and Nia Okafor stepped out onto the 53rd floor of Daesung Tower, carrying a stack of encrypted folders, a cold cup of coffee she hadn't touched since noon, and the particular bone-deep exhaustion that came not from physical labor, but from 5 consecutive years of knowing too much. The floor was nearly empty. Most of the legitimate staff, the analysts, the compliance officers, the assistants who genuinely believed they worked for a logistics conglomerate, had cleared out by 6. What remained after hours on the executive level was something else entirely. 2 men in dark suits posted at the stairwell door, another near the private elevator that went directly to the penthouse, a low murmur of Korean behind the closed conference room, where Tae-hyun had been locked in since 2 in the afternoon with people whose names didn't appear in any company directory. Nia set the folders on her desk, dropped into her chair, and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until she saw white. Her desk was positioned directly outside the chairman's office, close enough that she could hear the cadence of his voice through the wall even when she couldn't make out the words, close enough that she caught the smell of his cigarette smoke in the evenings, the particular brand he kept for moments of controlled tension. She had learned to read his moods by sound alone, the measured pace when he was calculating, the silence before something bad happened, the low, unhurried way he spoke when he had already decided on an outcome and was simply allowing the other party to catch up. Tonight his voice was quiet, which meant tonight someone was in serious trouble. She pulled up the last of the day's correspondence on her screen and began working through it. Shipping confirmation from Busan. An acquisition inquiry from a company in Singapore that she recognized as a shell. She filed it in the folder that would go to Tae-hyun's second-in-command, a man named Choi Jae-won, who handled the parts of the business that required more direct persuasion. A meeting request from a senator's office in Seoul that needed a response worded carefully enough to be polite without being committable. This was the work. Not glamorous, not dangerous most days, just the constant grinding management of an empire that operated on 2 entirely separate tracks simultaneously, and the understanding that one wrong word in the wrong document could unravel both of them. Nia had not stumbled into this job. She had been recruited out of a graduate program in international business at Seoul National University, recruited specifically because she was brilliant, discreet, and an outsider. Tae-hyun had wanted someone who had no history in Korea's criminal ecosystem, no family loyalties, no existing debts or alliances. He had wanted someone who could look at his world clearly, without the distortion of fear or reverence that came with growing up inside it. What he had gotten was a 24-year-old from Atlanta, Georgia, who had grown up watching her father run a corner grocery store with a handshake economy and an iron memory for who owed what to whom. Nia had understood Tae-hyun's world faster than he had expected. Not because it was like anything she had known, it wasn't, but because she had always had a talent for understanding systems, how they worked, where they were vulnerable, what held them together when everything else was falling apart. 5 years later, she was 38, she was exhausted, and she was still there. She finished the last of the correspondence, saved her work, and leaned back in her chair. Through the floor-to-ceiling window behind her desk, Seoul spread itself in every direction, a galaxy of light and commerce and noise, compressed and glittering under a sky the color of iron. She had grown to love this city in a reluctant, complicated way. It had given her a career that paid extraordinarily well and asked for nearly everything in return. She reached under her desk and pulled out the bag she had stowed there that morning with more deliberate planning than she usually gave to her own life. Inside was a dress, emerald silk. She had bought it 3 weeks ago and then left it in the bag for 3 weeks because she kept finding reasons not to wear it. Tonight she had run out of reasons. The restaurant reservation was at 8. She had 45 minutes. She stood, took the bag to the private restroom adjacent to her office, and locked the door behind her. The woman who walked out of that restroom 10 minutes later looked like someone Nia Okafor might have been if she hadn't spent 5 years making herself invisible. The dress was the color of sea glass in deep water, a green so saturated it seemed to produce its own light in the overhead fluorescence of the executive floor. It followed the exact shape of her body without apology, cut to fall just above the knee, the silk moving with a weight and confidence that her usual oversized suits never had. She had let her hair out of its workday knot. She had put on the earrings her mother had sent her 2 Christmases ago and which she had never once worn to the office. She studied herself in the mirror for a moment, not with vanity, but with the careful clinical assessment she gave to most things. Then she picked up her work bag, straightened her spine, and walked back out to her desk to collect her purse. She did not hear the conference room door open. She did not hear footsteps. She became aware of Kang Tae-hyun's presence the way she always did. Through a change in the atmosphere, a slight compression of the air around him that she had never been able to explain scientifically and had long since stopped trying to. She turned. He was standing in the hallway between the conference room and his private office, 12 feet away, and he had stopped walking. He was still wearing his suit jacket. The top button of his shirt was open, the one concession to the long day. His hands were in his pockets, which was where they went when he was processing something he hadn't anticipated. He was 41 years old, lean and dark-eyed, with the kind of face that would have been handsome in a simpler context, and in this context was simply dangerous. He was staring at her, not the efficient assessing glance he used on most things, not the controlled sweep of a man taking inventory. He was staring, and for a full 3 seconds he did nothing else. Nia held his gaze. She was used to being looked at in this building, not like this, but in general. She was used to the mild curiosity of staff who had never quite made sense of her, the occasional condescension of visiting associates who made assumptions she quietly corrected, the particular way certain men looked at a black woman in a position of authority as though they were waiting to discover the mistake. She had a practiced neutrality for all of it. She did not have a practiced neutrality for this. "I'm leaving for the evening," she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. He said nothing for another beat. Then, "Where?" Not a question. Kang Tae-hyun rarely asked questions. He made space for information and people filled it. "I have a dinner reservation," she said. "Personal, 8 o'clock. Something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, a contraction around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw that was different from his ordinary stillness. If she had not spent 5 years studying the microscopic weather system of his face, she would have missed it entirely. "Cancel it," he said. Nia looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. The word landed in the hallway like something dropped from a considerable height. His expression didn't change. His hands stayed in his pockets. But she could see the exact moment the word registered, not as defiance, which he dealt with through other channels, but as something new, something he didn't have a category for yet. She picked up her purse from the desk, tucked it under her arm, and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. The indicator light glowed amber above the doors. Nia. She turned. He had moved. Not toward her, just shifted his weight, one hand now out of his pocket. He was looking at her the way she imagined a man might look at something he had owned for a long time without understanding its value, and had only just now, at the worst possible moment, figured it out. "Enjoy your evening," she said, without particular warmth or coldness. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. As they closed, she got one last look at him standing in the middle of his own hallway, in the middle of his own empire, looking for the first time in 5 years like a man who had no idea what to do next. The elevator reached the lobby. Nia exhaled. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest, and she pressed a hand flat against her sternum and told it firmly to stop. This was not the time. She had a date. She had put on a real dress for the first time in 2 years. She was going to eat food that someone else cooked, in a restaurant that did not involve criminal logistics, and she was going to have a conversation with a man who did not know where bodies were buried and did not need her to pretend otherwise. She walked through the lobby and out into the sole evening, and the city swallowed her whole. On the 53rd floor, Kang Tae-hyun stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window behind his desk and watched the street below until he identified the particular set of taillights that was his building's car. She hadn't called her own cab, which meant she'd used the company service out of habit, which meant his driver knew where she was going. He pulled out his phone. "J1. Chairman, the car that just left the building, where's it going? A pause. Keys clicking. Restaurant called Soyang View, Han River area. Reservation under... Another pause. Brooks. Adrian Brooks. Taehyun was quiet for a moment. Find me everything on that name. Business records, financial history, personal associations. I want it in 20 minutes. 20 minutes is tight. 15. He hung up. He stood at the window for another moment. Seoul burned and glittered beneath him like a circuit board running at dangerous current. He had told himself for 5 years that what he felt was professional regard, that it was the natural protectiveness of a man toward the one person in his organization who genuinely could not be replaced, that the particular weight that settled in his chest every time she walked into his office in the morning was something he could manage, contain, file away in the same part of himself where he kept every other thing that could not be acknowledged in daylight. He had been lying. He'd known he was lying. He had told himself it didn't matter. The emerald dress had knocked every single one of those justifications directly out of his head, and what was left underneath was not a corporate calculation. It was something older and less reasonable and considerably more dangerous. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. Chaewon had taken 17 minutes instead of 15, but what he had sent was worth the extra 2. Taehyun read the file with the same focused attention he gave to everything, and by the third paragraph, the temperature in the room had changed. He set the phone down. He put on his jacket. He walked to the elevator. A sec. The Soyang View occupied the top floor of a building that cantilevered over the Han River embankment, all glass and pale stone and indirect lighting designed to make everyone inside it look better than they actually were. The kind of place where the menu had no prices and the service was invisible, and conversations were insulated from the outside world by a combination of architecture and social contract. Nia had arrived 7 minutes early, been shown to a corner table with an unobstructed river view, and ordered a glass of Riesling that she was still nursing when Adrian Brooks walked in at 8:02. He was, and she registered this with the practiced objectivity of someone who had learned not to trust first impressions. Handsome. Not in a sharp way, in a soft, constructed way. The kind of handsome that came with careful grooming and good tailoring rather than anything innate. He was maybe 35, American, or close to it. The accent, when he introduced himself, had the flat Midwestern quality of someone who had been educated somewhere expensive and had sanded off whatever regional specificity he'd started with. "Nia," he said, sliding into the chair across from her with the ease of someone who had done this particular thing, walked into restaurants, charmed women across tables, many times before. Honestly, you look stunning." "Thank you," she said, without particular investment in the compliment. "Have you been to Seoul long?" "About a year," he said. "Consulting work. International logistics. That's actually how I found your profile. Mutual professional circles." She lifted her wine glass, said nothing. The first 20 minutes were fine, surface level. He asked about her background. She gave him the abbreviated version. Atlanta, Seoul National University, the last several years in executive support at a large holdings company, carefully omitting everything that would have required explaining. He was charming in the way that people were when they had practiced being charming. He laughed at the right moments. He leaned in with apparent interest. He was good at it, but the questions kept bending. It was subtle at first. A natural-seeming pivot from her professional background to what exactly the logistics side of Daesung Holdings looked like from the inside. Whether the company had expanded its Busan port operations recently, he'd heard something about a new customs partnership. Whether she found the executive level particularly demanding, or whether Chairman Kang ran a relatively decentralized operation. She kept her expression neutral and her answers vague. She said she wasn't really at liberty to discuss operational specifics. She smiled. She deflected. He pivoted again, talking about a mutual contact she had never heard of, a name dropped casually, watching her face for recognition. She gave him nothing. He moved on, smooth as water rerouting around stone, and tried a different approach. The encrypted database systems Daesung had reportedly implemented last year. Had she found those a significant adjustment to her workflow? Nia set her fork down. She had a specific practice feeling she trusted above most of her other instincts. It had been developed over 5 years of sitting in rooms where the wrong word at the wrong moment had consequences. It was the feeling of a table that was tilted. Everything looked level on the surface, and then you set something down and it slid. Everything Adrian Brooks said kept sliding toward the same place. She was weighing how to end the evening gracefully, how to leave without indicating that she had caught on, which would have its own complications, when the room changed. It was not a dramatic change. The music continued. The ambient conversation did not stop. But something, a pressure shift, a collective recalibration of attention, moved through the restaurant from the entrance, and Nia had felt that particular sensation enough times to know exactly what it meant before she even looked up. Kang Tae-hyun walked in. He was wearing all black, suit, shirt, no tie. His two closest security men were with him, posted flanking at a distance that looked casual and wasn't. The maitre d' appeared at his elbow and was quietly waved aside. He didn't take the table he was being offered. He walked directly across the restaurant floor, between the candlelit tables, without looking at any of them, toward the corner where Nia sat. Adrian Brooks saw him coming and went very still, in the way that people went still when their nervous system recognized a predator before their conscious mind caught up. Tae-hyun reached the table. He pulled out the empty chair on Nia's side of the table, not across from her beside her, and sat down with the easy authority of a man who had never once in his adult life been asked to leave anywhere. He looked at Adrian Brooks. He did not speak. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 15. Long enough that a couple at a nearby table glanced over with the careful, minimal attention people paid to situations they wanted to be able to say they hadn't witnessed. "Mr. Brooks," Tae-hyun said finally. His English was precise and accented and very quiet. "Or is it Agent Brooks? I haven't decided which is more accurate." Adrian's face did something complicated. He recovered fast. Nia gave him that, but not fast enough. "I'm sorry, I don't... You have a Korean phone number registered through a proxy service in Incheon." Tae-hyun didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "Your consulting firm was incorporated 11 months ago and has no clients. Your professional history prior to 18 months ago exists in summary only. No detail that could be verified independently." A pause. "You're connected to the Big Dragon Syndicate through 3 intermediate contacts, which I find particularly unfortunate given the current climate between our organizations." Thus, the table was silent. Adrian Brooks looked at Nia. She looked back at him with an expression that gave away nothing, though her pulse was doing something rhythmically unpleasant behind her eyes. "You used a public professional database to target Ms. Okafor specifically," Tae-hyun continued. "Her access to certain operational details made her useful to you. I understand the logic." He leaned back slightly. It was still a mistake. Adrian's charm had evaporated. What was underneath it was something harder and less pleasant, the face of someone doing a risk calculation and not liking the numbers. "This is a public restaurant," he said. "You can't—" "I'm not going to do anything here," Tae-hyun said. "That would be impolite." He said it with complete sincerity. "But I want you to understand something clearly before you leave. Miss Okafor is under my protection. She has been for 5 years. Anyone who approaches her as a means of reaching me learns this eventually." He let that sit. "You've learned it relatively cheaply. I'd recommend treating that as the gift it is." He reached across, picked up Nia's wine glass, and set it on the other side of her, putting himself physically between her and Adrian. The gesture was small and deliberate, and somehow more territorial than anything else that had happened in the last 5 minutes. Adrian stood. He did not say anything. He walked out of the restaurant with the controlled pace of a man who knew he was being watched and was refusing to let himself run. The ambient noise of the restaurant slowly normalized around their table. Nia stared at the river through the window. The Han moved in the dark below them, indifferent and wide. "How long have you been running surveillance on my personal life?" she said. Her voice was steady. She was working hard on that. "I received the information tonight," Tae-hyun said. "I acted on it." "That's not an answer." "I know." She turned and looked at him directly. He was watching the space where Adrian had been sitting, but he felt her look and met it. Up close, in candlelight, with the particular quality of stillness he carried when he was not performing composure but actually feeling it, he looked almost like a different person from the man who ran the 53rd floor. "You told him I was under your protection," she said. "You are." "I'm your employee." "Yes." "That's all." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quickly, but unmistakably. "Is that what you want it to be?" he said. It was not quite a question. She felt the weight of it land in her sternum and stay there. I want, she said carefully, to have had one normal evening. I know. And you came here anyway. Yes. Because of the dress, she said, with a flatness that wasn't entirely genuine. You saw me in a real dress for the first time, and suddenly you're… No. The word was quiet and immediate. Not because of the dress. She waited. Because I was not going to let a baked dragon operative spend an evening extracting information from you while you tried to have a normal evening, he said. That's why I came here. And the dress had nothing to do with it. A pause. That's a separate conversation. I don't want a separate conversation, she said. I want to go home. He nodded once, like a man accepting a sentence. He stood, straightened his jacket. His security team materialized from their positions around the room. He offered his hand to help her up, old-fashioned, uncharacteristic, and somehow exactly right, and she looked at it for a moment before she took it. His hand was warm. She had never noticed that before. They walked out of the restaurant together, and the other diners did their best to look at other things, and outside the Seoul night was cool and bright and enormous around them. Well, the company car was waiting. Taehyun's driver opened the rear door. Nia got in. Taehyun got in on the other side. The door closed and they were in the particular privacy of a moving vehicle, with the city streaming past the tinted windows and no one else in the cabin. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Seoul unrolled outside. The Han River Bridge, the compression of the Gangnam skyline, the descent into the residential street south of the district where Nia's apartment building sat. She watched the streets without really seeing them. She was trying to reassemble the last 2 hours into something that made sense. Nia. She turned. Taehyun was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him. It wasn't the controlled neutrality of the office, or the cold precision of a business meeting, or the particular brand of danger he projected when he needed a room to understand its situation. It was something stripped back, something that had the texture of something said aloud for the first time after a very long time of not being said. I destroyed them, he said, every man who came near you, for 5 years. She stared at him. Park Sung-ho, who asked you to dinner in the 3rd month and never called you again after I had a conversation with his employer. His voice was even, almost clinical. Kim Dae-jung, the Canadian at the embassy reception, the man from the Busan office. He paused. I told myself it was a security precaution, that anyone in proximity to you was a potential vulnerability in the organization. He looked at the window, then back at her. That was a lie. The car moved through the city. Nia felt something cold move through her chest, followed immediately by something else. A heat that she couldn't fully name, complicated and unwelcome and persistent. You sabotaged my relationships, she said slowly, for 5 years. Yes, because I couldn't stand it, he said simply, without drama or self-pity. That's the truth. There is no version of it that reflects well on me. She exhaled, she pressed her fingers to her eyes. Taehyun. The first gunshot hit the rear quarter panel of the vehicle with a sound like a hammer strike, and then everything happened at once. The driver shouted. The car swerved. The back window fractured but didn't shatter. Armored glass. Spider webbing from a central impact point. Outside, headlights appeared from 2 directions simultaneously. Not city traffic, deliberate, closing in. And the second shot hit the roof, and then the third and fourth came so close together they sounded like one. Taehyun moved without hesitation. He threw himself across the seat, covering Nia with his full body weight, pressing her flat against the door on the far side. She felt the heat of him, the specific solidity of him, and beneath that the methodical animal calm of someone who had been in situations like this before and had trained for them. Stay down, he said against her ear. His voice had changed entirely, quiet and precise, zero wasted breath. He came up enough to reach under his jacket, and she heard the familiar, unmistakable sound of a weapon being drawn. The car took 2 more impacts. One of Taehyun's security vehicles pulled alongside them. She could hear the return fire starting, the controlled bursts from men who were very good at what they were paid to do. She kept her face against the seat and focused on breathing. She was not afraid precisely. She was in a specific suspended state she recognized from the handful of times in 5 years when the 2 tracks of Daesung Holdings had intersected violently in her immediate vicinity, a state of crystalline focus where everything outside the next 10 seconds became irrelevant. She was, however, acutely aware that Kang Tae-hyun was still lying across her, and that his hand had found hers in the dark of the cabin, and that he was holding it with a grip that was not gentle and was not letting go. The shooting lasted 45 seconds. It felt considerably longer. Then there was a different quality of silence, the silence after, rather than the silence before. And Tae-hyun said something in Korean into his earpiece that she didn't follow entirely, and the car slowed and stopped. She straightened up. There was a cut on her forearm from something, glass, she thought, from a fragment she hadn't tracked. Tae-hyun looked at it immediately. His face was a landscape she had never seen before. The control was there, yes, but underneath it was something raw and furious and frightened, and the combination was destabilizing in a way that the gunshots had not quite been. "I'm fine," she said. He was still holding her hand. "Tae-hyun," she said quietly. "What just happened?" He looked out the window at the street, where his men were moving with efficient precision through the aftermath of what had clearly been a planned, coordinated attack. His jaw was set. His breathing was controlled and even, and she had the sense that it was taking real effort to keep it that way. "Beg, Dragon," he said. "They were watching the restaurant. They followed us. They were already in position." He looked at her. This wasn't improvised. They planned it. The implications of that opened out in her mind like something unfolding. The restaurant, Adrian's specific questions, the targeted approach through her specifically. "I was the bait," she said. "Not just for information, for you." He met her eyes. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. Outside, Seoul continued to move around the stopped vehicle, vast and indifferent. The city digesting the last 60 seconds of violence with the practiced opacity it brought to everything it preferred not to officially acknowledge. "So what happens now?" she said. Tae-hyun looked at her for a long moment. The raw thing in his face had not gone away. He still had her hand. "Now," he said, "we go somewhere safe. And then, he said, "there's a war." The city lights moved across his face through the fractured rear window, breaking into fragments, reassembling, breaking again. Nia looked at him, at this man she had worked beside for 5 years, who had told her the truth and lied to her simultaneously, who had kept her close and kept her caged and thrown himself between her and gunfire with the specific certainty of someone who had made a decision long before the moment that required it. She did not pull her hand away. The full truth was still hours ahead of them. The war had not yet started, and neither of them knew yet exactly what they had agreed to by not letting go. The safe house was not a house. It was a fortified apartment on the 14th floor of a residential tower in Mapogu, registered under a corporate shell that didn't connect to Daesung Holdings through fewer than 4 intermediary entities. Tae-hyun kept 3 of them distributed across Seoul's different districts. Not because he expected to need them frequently, but because the kind of man he was had long since learned that the difference between being prepared and being careless was measured in outcomes that could not be undone. Nia stepped inside and stood in the entryway while one of the security team swept the rooms, and she looked at the space with the particular clarity that came after adrenaline burned off and left everything lit and precise. Clean lines. Minimal furniture. A kitchen that had been stocked recently. She could smell something faintly antiseptic beneath the neutral air, the smell of a place cleaned and made ready rather than actually lived in. A wide window with the blinds already drawn. 2 doors off the main room, both closed. She set her purse on the counter. She was still in the emerald dress. It felt wrong now in a way it hadn't before. Too much, too deliberate. A choice she had made in a different version of this evening. Behind her, she heard Tae-hyun dismiss the security team with 3 words in Korean. The door closed. And then it was just the 2 of them in the quiet of a room that had no history between them, which somehow made it worse. She turned around. He was standing near the door with his jacket off, his weapon still holstered at his ribs, his sleeves pushed to the elbow. He was looking at her arm, the cut from the glass, which had stopped bleeding but had dried in a thin dark line down her forearm. He moved toward the kitchen without asking, opened 3 cabinets before he found the first aid supplies, and brought them to the counter. "Sit," he said. "I can do it myself." "I know." He pulled a stool out from under the counter and set it in front of him. He looked at her, and it was not a look that argued. It was simply a look that waited. She sat. He worked on the cut with a focused, careful economy of movement that she recognized from the way he did everything. No wasted motion, full attention, as though this small task were the only thing in the world currently requiring his management. The antiseptic stung. She held still. His fingers were precise and impersonal on her arm, and she was very aware of them anyway. How bad was the damage to the car, she said. Recoverable. Your men, 2 injuries, neither critical. He pressed a thin strip of closure tape across the cut without looking up. The team that hit us, 3 confirmed eliminated at the scene. The rest dispersed. Beck Dragon. Yes. She watched him smooth the edge of the tape with his thumb. They're going to try again. Yes. Soon. Within 48 hours, probably. He stepped back, put the supplies down. They committed resources to tonight's operation. If it had worked, they would have ended the war before it started. It didn't work. Now they have 2 choices: retreat and regroup, or escalate before I can organize a counter-response. He met her eyes. They'll escalate. She nodded. She knew enough about the operational logic of criminal organizations to follow that without difficulty. What do you need from me? He looked at her for a moment. Nothing tonight. Tae-hyun. Tonight you rest, he said. Tomorrow we talk about the organizational response. Tonight? He stopped, set his hands flat on the counter. Something was working in his face that wasn't operational. Tonight was my fault, he said. The exposure. I let it get this far. She studied him. You mean Adrian? I mean the last 5 years, he said. What I told you in the car, the way I handled, or didn't handle. He stopped again. Tae-hyun was not a man who struggled with sentences. The fact that he was struggling now told her something. You want to apologize, she said. I'm not sure an apology covers it. It doesn't, she said. He absorbed that without flinching. No. You removed people from my life, she said. Without telling me. Without asking me. For 5 years I thought... She put her hand flat on the counter, steadying herself against something that wasn't physical. I thought there was something wrong with me. That I was... She stopped. She did not want to give him that particular piece of information. She amended. I thought it was Seoul, the city, the work environment. I couldn't understand why nothing ever developed past a certain point. Tae-hyun was very still. It was you, she said. Every time. Yes. And you're telling me this now because you deserve to know it, he said, and because I'm not going to keep lying to you by omission, while simultaneously asking you to stay in my building and trust me with your safety. She looked at him across the counter. The overhead light was functional rather than flattering, and it showed every line of fatigue in his face, and there were more of them than she had registered before in the managed light of the office. He looked his age tonight. He looked like a man who was tired in a way that sleep wasn't going to fix. Why me? She said. Specifically. You could have... I know what you're going to say. Then answer it. He was quiet for a moment. You came in on your first day, and I had 3 associates in my office, and you walked in with a correction to a document I had already signed off on, in front of all 3 of them, without hesitating. He said it without warmth or nostalgia, just factually, as though recounting coordinates. You were 24 years old, and you had been in my building for 6 hours, and you were already completely unafraid of me. I didn't know enough to be afraid yet. That's what I thought, he said. And then a month later you knew everything, and you still weren't afraid. She said nothing. There are people in my world who are not afraid of me because they're stupid, he said, and people who are not afraid because they believe they have enough leverage to protect themselves, and people who are not afraid because they're more dangerous than I am. A pause. You were none of those. You just weren't afraid. Because being afraid wasn't useful, so you chose not to be. He looked at her with something that was close to bewilderment even after all this time. I have never in my life met another person who made that choice consciously and actually held to it. The apartment was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a siren moved across the city and faded. That's not... she started. The door to the apartment opened. Choi Jae-won stepped inside. Tae-hyun's right hand was 37 years old, compact and dark-eyed, with a face that worked hard at appearing mild. He had been with Tae-hyun for 11 years. He handled the parts of the operation that required not just competence but a specific, cold kind of loyalty, the kind forged in situations where the alternative to holding the line was something neither party wanted to think about. He looked at Nia. He looked at Tae-hyun. He clocked the first aid supplies on the counter, the two of them in close quarters in a safe house at 11:15 at night, and his expression did not change, which was how Nia knew he had thoughts about it. Chairman. He moved past the entryway, set a tablet on the counter. We have a problem. Beyond the obvious. Beyond the obvious? Jaewon pulled up something on the tablet and turned it to face them. It was a financial document, dense, columned, formatted with the specific aesthetic of internal accounting software rather than anything produced for external eyes. This came out of our post-incident sweep tonight. The team that hit you, we pulled the communication relay they were using. It was routed through our own network. The air in the room changed. Taehyun looked at the document without touching it. Explain. Someone inside our organization gave Baked Dragon access to our encrypted relay protocols, Jaewon said. His voice was flat and completely without inflection, the way it always was when he was delivering information he knew was going to cause significant damage. They had the authentication codes, current ones, updated within the last 72 hours. Which means the leak is recent, Taehyun said, or ongoing and recently refreshed. Nia looked between them. How many people have access to those codes? Jaewon looked at her. He always had a slightly particular way of looking at her. Not hostile, not warm, somewhere in the middle, as though he respected her competence and remained privately unconvinced that her presence in Taehyun's inner circle was wise. Operationally, 14, including everyone in this room. Then you have a short list, she said. We have a short list, he agreed. And one of the names on it was at that restaurant tonight. The sentence landed in the room like something heavy. Taehyun said, Who? Park Min-joon, Jaewon said. He was running the secondary security detail for the evening. I confirmed it from the vehicle logs 20 minutes ago. He was positioned 2 blocks from the restaurant from 6:40 onwards, which means he was in place before Miss Okafor arrived, and before you decided to go. He paused. He knew the evening's movements before they were finalized internally. Taehyun was quiet. Nia watched his face and watched the precise, controlled way he absorbed betrayal. Not with shock, because she had never once seen him shocked, but with the particular quality of stillness that meant he was compressing something that in another man might have expressed as rage. Park Min-joon had been with the organization for 9 years. He had been at Taehyun's side during the consolidation of the Western distribution network. He had taken a bullet in Incheon in 2021 that had been meant for Taehyun's chest and had accepted the scar without complaint or leverage. Where is he now? Taehyun said. In the wind, Jaewon said. His phone went dark 30 minutes after the attack. His apartment is empty. He knew we'd pull the relay logs. He's been planning this. Yes. Another silence. Taehyun moved away from the counter, walked to the window, stood with his back to the room. Nia watched the tension in his shoulders, the specific, high-set tension of a man doing the work of not showing what he felt. Pull every access log for the last 90 days, he said. Cross-reference against Min-joon's movements. I want a complete picture of what they have. Already running. Jaewon looked at Nia. Ms. Okafor, the relay Min-joon compromised. You use that system for some of the encrypted correspondence. I use it for the chairman's external communications, she said. The financial routing confirmations. Some of the cargo documentation. Which means Baked Dragon may have a partial window into shipment schedules and cash flow documentation for the last 72 hours is the authentication update cycle, she said, already running it forward in her head. If you refresh the codes at the update, they have 72 hours of intercept. What cleared in that window? She looked at Taehyun's back. The Incheon transfer. The Hamburg confirmation. Taehyun turned around. Can you contain it? The Incheon transfer is already completed. The exposure is historical. They can't reverse it. The Hamburg confirmation. She thought. If I contact Director Shell through the secondary channel and trigger a reroute protocol, we can move the cargo before Baked Dragon can position to intercept. But I need to do it before 6 a.m. Seoul time. Taehyun looked at Jaewon. She's right, Jaewon said, with the careful neutrality of a man who did not enjoy saying that. Do it, Taehyun said to Nia. She was already pulling her phone from her purse. She worked for 90 minutes at the kitchen counter, phone and the tablet Jaewon had left her, rebuilding containment protocols around the leak with the focused speed of someone who had spent 5 years knowing exactly where every sensitive thread ran and how to pull them without unraveling the whole fabric. Tae-hyun moved between the main room and the smaller room off the hall that served as a secondary office, handling his own parallel response. She could hear the low, even cadence of him on calls, Korean she caught in pieces, the names of men being moved into position around the city. Kaewon sat on the couch with a second tablet and said almost nothing, which was his most functional state. By 1:15 a.m., the Hamburg cargo was rerouted. The immediate financial exposure was contained. The relay system had been shut down, and the authentication codes had been burned and reissued through a clean channel that Min-jun had never had access to. Nia set the phone down and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She was still in the emerald dress. "You should sleep," Jaewon said from the couch, without looking up from his tablet. "I'm aware. There's a room, second door." "I know where the rooms are," she said. She had been in this safe house twice before, in the last 5 years, both times under circumstances that had required rapid relocation and had not included conversation about sleeping arrangements. She stood, stretched her neck, and looked at the door to the secondary office. It was closed. She could still hear Tae-hyun's voice, low and continuous, in the cadence of a man managing a significant and multi-directional crisis, with methodical, grinding patience. She went to the second room, closed the door, and stood in the dark for a moment. The room had a bed, a window with sealed blinds, a chair. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. She thought about Park Min-jun, whom she had known for 4 years and had eaten lunch near in the company cafeteria and had never once felt was watching her with anything other than the occupational attention of a man whose job involved paying attention. She thought about the dinner table at the Soyoung View and Adrian Brooks, and the questions that had slid and slid toward the same destination. She thought about Tae-hyun in the car, in the wreckage of what he had confessed, holding her hand with a certainty that had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with need. She thought about the men who had disappeared, Park Sung-ho, who had seemed genuinely interested and had gone cold without explanation after what she'd assumed was a change of heart, the Canadian at the embassy, Kim Dae-jung. She had grieved those quietly in the way she grieved most things, privately, efficiently, without burdening anyone with the evidence of it. She had concluded, somewhere in the third year, that relationships in her current context were simply not possible, that the work asked too much and the secrecy cost too much, and that the right person, if they existed, would appear when the season changed. The season had not changed. The right person had been 40 feet away from her every working day for 5 years, and had been removing every alternative with the systematic precision he applied to everything else. She couldn't fully name what she felt about that. It occupied a space that was not quite outrage and not quite grief, and not quite the thing that lived underneath both of them, which was warmer and more frightening, and which she was not ready to examine in a strange room in the middle of the night, while the city outside was presumably being reorganized around an oncoming war. She lay back on the bed without taking off the dress. She stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep for a long time. But says At 3:40 a.m., she heard Jaewon leave. The front door, then quiet. At 3:55, she heard Tae-hyun's footsteps cross the main room. They stopped outside her door for 3 seconds. She lay still and listened to the 3 seconds with a focus that was slightly absurd under the circumstances. Then the footsteps moved on, and the second door, the other room, closed quietly. She exhaled. She thought 5 years. She thought every single one of them. She closed her eyes. Morning came in around the edges of the sealed blinds, thin and gray, the particular flat light of a soul morning that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to commit to the day. Nia woke without an alarm, which was how she always woke, her internal clock indifferent to circumstances. 6:14 a.m. She went to the bathroom, washed her face with the impersonal soap that safe houses stocked, looked at herself in the mirror with the same clinical assessment she'd given herself the night before in the office restroom. Less good results this time. The dress was wrinkled. The cut on her arm was sealed and slightly swollen around the tape. There were shadows under her eyes that 4 hours of fitful non-sleep had deepened. She went out to the main room. Tae-hyun was already at the kitchen counter, 2 cups of coffee poured, his phone face down beside them. He was in the same clothes as last night, jacket off, sleeves rolled, and he had the particular self-contained quality of someone who functioned adequately on very little sleep because he had long since made peace with that being the condition. He looked at her when she came in. His eyes moved briefly over the dress, the arm, her face. He pushed one of the coffees toward her side of the counter. She sat down. They drank coffee in silence for a moment. Minjun, she said. One of my teams located him at 4 a.m. He's in Beck Dragon's custody. A pause. Or protection, depending on his arrangement with them. You think he flipped voluntarily? I think no one accidentally hands over current authentication codes, Tae-hyun said. Yes, voluntary. Why? That's what I'm still working on. He set down his cup. He had no financial pressure that we've identified, no external threats to his family. He's not being blackmailed. Or if he is, the blackmail material is something we haven't found yet. He looked at the window. Which leaves ideology, personal grievance, or an offer significant enough to outweigh 11 years. What could they offer him? The Daesung Network's Eastern distribution arm, Tae-hyun said flatly. If Baked Dragon takes this war and breaks us up, they'll divide the operational territory among their key people. If Min-jun is the one who delivered them the opening, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Nia wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. The ceramic was warm. So this has been in motion for a while. Months, probably. And the dinner last night, Adrian, the relay access, the ambush, was the execution phase, he said. Yes, they waited until they believed they had enough accumulated intelligence to take a decisive shot. His jaw tightened. They almost did. She looked at him. You're not almost dead. You're not almost dead, he said, with a precision that was not gentle. That's the part I keep returning to. The silence that followed had a different quality from the silences of the night before. It was smaller, more specific. Tae-hyun, she said, what I said last night, about the dress, about thinking it was just, you don't have to. I'm talking, she said. He stopped. I spent the better part of last night thinking about it, about what you told me in the car. And I want to say something that I need you to hear without turning it into something it isn't. So I need you to just... She gestured with one hand, a short, controlled gesture. Let me finish. He nodded once. What you did was wrong, she said. Not complicated, not justifiable by whatever you felt. Wrong. You made decisions about my life that were mine to make, and you made them without my knowledge and dressed them up as protection. And if you had told me at any point in the last 5 years, I would have... She stopped, recalibrated. It would have been different. It would have changed things. She looked at him directly. I don't know yet whether I can separate what I feel right now from everything you just handed me. I don't know whether what's between us is real or whether it's a version of real that you shaped by eliminating every other option. She paused. I need you to understand that I'm not certain. He held her gaze without blinking. I understand. And you're not going to argue it. No. Why not? Because you're right, he said. And because arguing it would be another way of making your uncertainty about me into something I manage for you. And I'm not... He stopped, and she saw the effort it cost him. I'm done managing things for you without your knowledge. Whatever that costs me. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought, he means that. She thought, I'm not sure that makes it better yet. She thought, yet. She opened her mouth to say something that was going to be careful and measured and appropriately guarded, and then Tae-hyun's phone, face down on the counter between them, began to vibrate with the specific continuous pattern of an emergency alert rather than a standard call. He picked it up. She watched his face. She had spent 5 years learning to read him. She had cataloged every variation of his expressions under operational pressure. She knew what he looked like when something was bad. She knew what he looked like when something was very bad. She had never seen what was on his face right now. He set the phone down on the counter with a careful, deliberate movement that was somehow more alarming than any abrupt gesture could have been. What? She said. He looked at her. Jaewon, he said. They have Jaewon. The coffee cup was still warm in her hands. The thin gray soul morning pressed itself against the sealed blinds. Somewhere in the city, the man who had been Tae-hyun's right hand for 11 years was in the custody of the people who had already tried to kill them once. And the message on the phone, she could see the edge of it, the last visible line before the screen locked, had a number on it, and the number was a deadline, and the deadline was 6 hours. Nia read it off the edge of the screen before Tae-hyun turned the phone face down again, and 6 hours was enough. enough to understand the shape of what was being asked, enough to know that whatever was supposed to happen at the end of those 6 hours had been planned well in advance of Jae-won's capture. This was not improvisation. This was the next phase. Tae-hyun stood up from the counter and walked to the window and stood with his back to her, both hands flat against the wall on either side of the sealed blind. She watched the line of his shoulders. She watched him breathe. 4 slow counts in, held, released. The specific breathing pattern of a man who had trained himself not to let catastrophe move through him faster than he could process it. She gave him 45 seconds. "Show me the full message," she said. He didn't move for a moment. Then he picked up the phone and brought it to her without turning it over first, set it on the counter in front of her, screen up. She read it. The message was short, operational. No excess language, no performance of menace. Choi Jae-won was alive and in their custody. In exchange for his return, Tae-hyun would present himself at a specified location, a warehouse address in the Mapo Industrial Corridor, 4 kilometers from where they were sitting, at noon. Alone. He would bring the master access credentials for Daesung Holdings' encrypted financial architecture. Full administrative override. The kind of access that would let whoever held it dismantle the organization from the inside out. Reroute every asset. Torch every operational relationship built over 15 years. The final line read, "Bring the woman. She confirms the credentials are real." Naya read that last line twice. She set the phone down. "They know where we are," she said. "They knew before we arrived," Tae-hyun said. "Minjun had the safe house locations. So this entire night, they let us run," he said. "They had us positioned and they let us run because they needed time to get Jae-won isolated and get the message to me." He turned around. His face was composed in the way that a concrete wall was composed. Not calm, just sealed over something that had significant pressure behind it. "They planned around my response. They knew I would move us here. They knew I would start a containment response. They let us work all night because it didn't matter. They already had everything they needed." She absorbed that. The Hamburg reroute may have been exactly what they wanted, he said. A demonstration that the credentials work, that you can operate the system. The cold moved through her slowly, starting at the back of her neck. They don't just want the credentials. No. They want me to authenticate them, in person, which means they need me there. Yes. Which means if you don't bring me, they won't accept the exchange. His voice had no color in it. Jae-won dies. And they release what they have, the intercept from the relay, the financial documentation, enough to bring 3 separate government investigations down on the organization simultaneously. He looked at her. They've been thorough. She stood up. She needed to move. She walked to the far end of the kitchen, turned, walked back. The dress was wrong. Everything about this morning was wrong. She pressed her fingers against the counter and thought with the rapid triage-style clarity she reached for when the ordinary analytical toolkit wasn't fast enough. "You're not going," she said. "Nia, you walk into that warehouse, you don't walk out," she said. "The credentials are a pretext. They want you in a controlled space without your security architecture around you. That's the actual objective." He looked at her with an expression that said he knew this already and had been sitting with it since he read the message. "What's Jae-won worth to you?" she said. Not cruelly, clinically. The answer took longer than she expected. "He's the only person in my organization I have trusted completely for 11 years, Tae-hyun said. "He has a daughter. She's 9 years old. Her mother died 4 years ago." A pause. He stayed. She heard what was underneath that. She heard what it meant that a man with a 9-year-old daughter and no partner had stayed in the operational center of a criminal organization, and what that said about the kind of loyalty that had built itself between them. "There's another option," she said. He waited. "You don't go to the warehouse," she said. "You send me." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "No," he said. "Listen." "No," he said again, and his voice had something in it now that wasn't operational. "That is not a discussion. You said you were done making decisions about my life without my knowledge," she said. "This is my life. I'm making a decision. That decision ends with you dead." "Maybe," she said, "or it ends with Jae-won alive and enough time bought for you to position a response team around that warehouse while they're focused on me." She looked at him steadily. "I know the credentials. I can authenticate them. And I'm the one they asked for specifically, which means I have value to them alive, which means I have leverage you don't have walking in there. The silence between them was a physical thing. Taehyun crossed the space between them in 3 steps and stopped close. Close enough that she could see the exact quality of what was happening in his face, which was not anger, not strategy, not the controlled processing of an operational problem. It was fear, bare and unmediated and completely unlike anything she had seen on him in 5 years. "I am not sending you in there," he said quietly. "You're not sending me," she said. "I'm going." "Nia, tell me the counterplan," she said. "Because you have one. You've had one since you read that message. I can see it. Tell me where I fit in it." A long moment. He stepped back. He ran one hand across his jaw. He looked at the ceiling for 3 seconds, the gesture of a man doing something that cost him something real. "I have 4 teams I can position in the industrial corridor within 90 minutes, he said. "The warehouse has 2 confirmed entry points from the building records. There may be more. If you go in with a live transmitter and you can keep them occupied for 12 minutes, my teams can be in position for a simultaneous breach." 12 minutes, she said. "It's a long 12 minutes. "I've had longer," she said, which was not entirely true but was the right thing to say in this moment. He looked at her. The fear was still there, underneath the operational framework. It had not gone anywhere. "If anything goes wrong, then something goes wrong," she said. "That's been true since last night." She picked up the coffee cup she had set down when the phone went off, found it had gone cold, drank it anyway. "Get me different clothes, and tell me everything you know about that warehouse." The transmitter was the size of a shirt button and had an adhesive backing designed to bond with fabric. Taehyun pressed it to the inside hem of the jacket one of his men had brought, dark gray, fitted, anonymous, and his fingers lingered on the fabric for a moment after it was placed, smoothing an edge that didn't need smoothing. She watched him do it. "It transmits clean through 2 layers of concrete," he said. "The team will have audio continuous. And if they sweep me, the device reads as a standard jacket rivet at any scanner frequency below military grade." He stepped back. "Fake Dragon doesn't carry military-grade equipment to domestic operations. Usually." "Usually," she repeated. "Usually," he confirmed, without apology for the qualifier. She buttoned the jacket. She had changed in the bathroom. Dark trousers, flat shoes built for movement, the jacket. Professional without being corporate. The kind of thing a woman wore when she needed to be taken seriously and might also need to run. Chaewon's replacement for the morning, a younger man named Han Sol, who had the specific quality of someone trained to do whatever he was told without expressing any opinion about it, was waiting by the door with a vehicle. Taehyun walked with her to the door. He stopped there. Outside the frame of the safe house, his teams were moving, phones and vehicles and positions being locked in with the grinding efficiency of an organization that had been built for exactly this kind of sustained crisis. Inside the frame, it was just the 2 of them, and the 12 minutes that stood between now and whatever happened next. "If you need to abort," he said, "say the word confirmed twice in a row. My teams breach immediately regardless of position." "Understood. If they separate you from the transmitter, I won't let them." "If they do," he said, with a patience that was also a kind of controlled desperation, "look for the loading bay on the north side. My team will come in through there first." She nodded. He was looking at her with the expression she still didn't have a fully formed category for, the one that had started in the hallway of the 53rd floor when she had turned around in an emerald dress and had been accumulating weight ever since. The fear in it was real. The other thing in it was also real. She had not decided yet what to do with either. "When this is over," she said. "When this is over," he agreed, without specifying what that meant, and she understood that he was making her a promise whose exact content would have to wait for a world in which both of them were still in it. She walked out the door. The Mapo industrial corridor at 10:40 in the morning looked like everywhere industrial in Seoul looked at that hour. Functional, unlovely, the specific gray-beige of poured concrete and corrugated metal under a sky that had committed to overcast. Trucks moved at measured intervals. Workers in high-visibility vests appeared and disappeared between structures. Nothing about it announced itself as the site of anything. Han Sol stopped the vehicle 2 blocks from the warehouse address and looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Miss Okafor." "I know," she said. She got out. She walked the 2 blocks on foot, which was how they had agreed it would look. Arriving on foot, no visible security, the performance of compliance. Her pulse was doing something rhythmic and insistent behind her ears that she noted and categorized and declined to engage with further. The cut on her arm pulled slightly with each step, a thin reminder of 12 hours ago and everything that had happened since. The warehouse was the fourth structure on the left off the main corridor road, larger than it looked in the building records, with a rolling shutter door standing open at ground level and a smaller personnel door beside it, also open, deliberately open. An invitation that was also a demonstration of control. Two men stood outside the personnel door. They looked at her without expression as she approached. One of them spoke Korean into an earpiece. The other stepped aside. She walked in. Miss. The interior was cavernous and mostly empty, the particular emptiness of a space that had been cleared recently rather than abandoned. Strip lighting overhead, the smell of oil and cold concrete and something chemical underneath both. 40 feet into the space, a cluster of people stood around a portable table with equipment on it, laptops, a portable communications array, a device she recognized as a frequency scanner. She saw Jae-won before she saw anything else. He was seated in a metal chair against the far wall, wrists secured behind him, a bruise developing along his left cheekbone that had the fresh, swollen look of something recent. He was conscious. He looked at her when she entered and something moved in his face. Not relief, or not entirely. Something more complicated. And then she saw who was standing beside him, and the floor moved. Park Min-jun was not hiding in the back. He was not positioned as a secondary operative. He was standing at the center of the group around the table with the specific body language of a man who owned the space. Not a man who had defected to the enemy, but a man who was running the operation. That was not the worst of it. The worst of it was the man standing to Min-jun's left, whom Nia had met 4 times in official contexts and who was not supposed to be in this building or connected to any of this in any capacity that Tae-hyun had identified. Director Woo Sang-chul, head of the National Financial Crimes Task Force. The man whose office had sent a meeting request, the one she had filed 2 days ago in the folder for careful response, was standing in a Bake Dragon operations site at 10:53 in the morning, and the expression on his face when he saw her was not surprise. He had known she was coming. Min-jun looked at her with something that was almost apologetic and entirely without remorse. "Ms. Okafor," he said, "thank you for being punctual." She kept her face still. She had 4 minutes before Tae-hyun's teams reached their outer positions. She needed 12. The math was already wrong, and she was still standing in the door. "Where's Choi Jae-won going after this?" she said. Not as an opener she had planned. As a way to buy 30 seconds while she recalibrated everything she thought she understood about the last 18 hours. "That depends on Chairman Kang's cooperation," Min-jun said. He moved toward the table, gesturing for her to come further into the space. "Come in. Let's talk about the credentials." She walked forward. She counted steps and exits and the positions of the 9 people she could identify in the space. She was looking for the north loading bay Tae-hyun had described. She found it. A large roll-up door at the far end, currently closed, with a manual release handle at chest height. Director Woo had not spoken yet. He was watching her with the careful attention of a man assessing how much she understood. She decided to tell him. "You're not here as law enforcement," she said to him directly. "You're here as a stakeholder." Woo looked at her for a moment. Then he almost smiled. "You're as good as he said." "Who said?" "Min-jun," Woo said. "He's been detailed about your capabilities." He moved toward the table, unhurried. "Let me explain the situation accurately, since we don't have a great deal of time, and I'd prefer not to have this conversation twice. Daesung Holdings has been the subject of a task force investigation for 2 years. In that time, we have accumulated enough for a prosecution. Not a certain conviction, but enough to move. However, a prosecution is expensive, slow, and produces uncertain outcomes." He looked at her with the specific flatness of a bureaucrat explaining an institutional decision. A controlled transfer of operational assets to a cooperative organization produces a cleaner outcome for everyone involved. "Everyone involved?" she said. "Meaning you." "Meaning the several parties who have been patient for 2 years," he said, without inflecting the word patient in any particular direction. "Chairman Kang built something significant. We're not destroying it. We're redirecting it." She understood then. This was not a criminal organization taking a run at a rival. This was an acquisition. Min-jun had not defected out of ideology or grievance. He had been the inside man for a deal that had been in negotiation for 2 years, between Bayek Dragon's operational leadership and a government official who had decided that controlling the infrastructure was more valuable than prosecuting it. Tae Hyun was not the target. The organization was, and they needed the credentials to take it without a war that would cost them the thing they were trying to acquire intact. She needed Tae Hyun to hear this. She needed him to understand that the breach teams coming in through the warehouse were walking into a situation with a government official present, which changed every calculation about force, about legal exposure, about what a successful outcome even looked like. She needed to say something with the word confirmed in it twice in a row, and she needed a reason to say it that wouldn't tell them immediately what she was doing. Chaewon was watching her from the chair. His jaw was tight. He had seen her clock the exit. He had seen her look at him. He was doing the same math she was doing, and he knew the answer was wrong, and his eyes, across the 40 feet between them, said, Don't confirm. Don't bring them in yet. She looked at him for 1 second. She looked back at Min-jun. I need to verify the transmission security on your system before I input the credentials, she said. If the authentication triggers an automatic alert to our own security architecture before the transfer completes, the whole process collapses. I need to check the protocol. Min-jun looked at the technician at the laptop. The technician nodded. Yes, that was a real concern. Yes, it was technically plausible. You have 3 minutes, Min-jun said. She sat down at the laptop. She had 3 minutes and a keyboard and a live transmitter in the hem of her jacket, and the man who was supposed to be coming to save Chaewon did not yet know that the person he most needed saving from was wearing a government badge. She began to type. She was not entering credentials. She was entering a message into the only system she was confident Tae Hyun's team was monitoring alongside the audio feed. The Daesung encrypted relay, the clean channel she had rebuilt at 2 a.m., the one Min-jun had never had access to. 11 words. Woo Sung-chul is here. Task force. Change approach. Do not breach. She hit send. She looked at the screen. She waited to find out if she had just saved them, or the cursor blinked. The message sat in the sent queue for 4 seconds, long enough that she started counting, long enough that the count became the only thing keeping her breathing at a normal rate. And then the delivery confirmation appeared. A single green indicator in the corner of the relay interface, so small that no one standing behind her would have registered it as anything other than a routine system acknowledgement. He had it. She let out the breath she had been holding and immediately took another one, because Min-jun was moving toward her from across the room, and she had approximately 8 seconds to look like a woman who had been doing exactly what she said she was doing. She pulled up the authentication protocol window and made a show of examining it, scrolling through lines of code with the practiced speed of someone who actually understood what they were reading, which she did, which was the only reason the performance was convincing. Her eyes moved across the screen. Her hands stayed steady. Her pulse was a fist against the inside of her throat. Min-jun stopped 2 feet behind her chair. Well, She, he said, the handshake sequence will need to be suppressed manually before I enter the primary credential string, she said, without looking up. Otherwise, the system flags it as an unauthorized external access attempt and locks the architecture for 72 hours. She turned and looked at him over her shoulder, which I assume is not what you want. Min-jun studied her face for a moment, looking for something. She held the look with the particular quality of stillness she had learned from the most dangerous man she knew and waited for him to finish. How long? He said. 6 minutes to suppress it properly, she said. 2 if you want to risk the lockout. He looked at the technician. The technician made a face that meant, she's probably right. Min-jun looked back at her. 6 minutes, he said. Then we proceed. He walked back toward Director Wu. She turned to the screen. She had 6 minutes, and she had sent the message, and now all she could do was work and wait and trust that the man who had spent 5 years making every wrong decision about her life would make the right one about this. Tae-hyun read the message at 10:58 a.m. while sitting in the back of an unmarked vehicle 2 streets from the warehouse perimeter, and the word Wu moved through him like a current. Han Sol, in the driver's seat, heard the silence change quality and turned around. Change of approach, Tae-hyun said. His voice was level. The levelness was costing him something. Get me everything we have on Woo Sung-chul's financial records, personal accounts, discretionary funds, anything that runs outside the official salary structure. I want it in 4 minutes. Chairman, the breach teams are in position. I know where they are. Hold them. He looked at his phone. He was doing the calculation that Nea had already done, the one where a government official in the room changed every parameter of what a successful outcome looked like, changed it from a criminal operation that could be dismantled by force to something that would survive a forced breach and become a legal catastrophe, a confirmed connection between Daesung Holdings and a violent confrontation with a national law enforcement director. They could not shoot their way out of this one, which meant Naya was in there with no extraction timeline, with 6 minutes she had manufactured, and with the only leverage available being something he hadn't had 4 minutes ago and needed to build in the next 3. He pulled up the financial architecture on his own device, not the compromised relay, the clean channel, the one she had rebuilt at 2 a.m., and began to move. At 11:04, Nia finished the suppression sequence, which had been real. Not a stall, an actual technical necessity she had executed correctly under the specific pressure of a man standing 2 feet behind her waiting for her to finish. She pushed back from the laptop. "It's ready," she said. Minjun moved. He said something to Director Wu in Korean that she followed. "She's ready. Get the confirmation team in position." Wu nodded and stepped to the side, pulling out his own phone. Chewan, still in the chair against the wall, had not moved. He was watching her with the focused attention of a man who had been calculating the same problem from a different angle and had reached a conclusion he was waiting for her to confirm or deny. His right wrist, she noticed, had shifted slightly in its restraint. Not loose, but worked. He had been working it for 90 minutes. Not yet, she thought in his direction. Not yet. She stood up from the chair. "Before I enter the primary string," she said, addressing Minjun directly, "I want to confirm Choi Jae-won's release terms, specifically, not in general. I want to hear exactly what happens to him." Minjun tilted his head. The mild-faced man, the one who had been 9 years in Tae-hyun's trust and had held a very different conversation with Director Wu's people for at least 2 of them. "He walks out," Minjun said. "Once the transfer is authenticated and the architecture access is confirmed, he's released, unharmed." "Your definition of unharmed already differs from mine," she said, looking at the bruise on Jae-won's face. "That was a communication issue earlier this morning," Minjun said. "It won't be repeated." "Communication issue," Jae-won said from the chair, with a flatness that was the closest thing to contempt she had ever heard from him. Minjun didn't look at him. Nia's phone, not the work device, her personal phone, which they had not taken because she had arrived apparently cooperative and apparently alone, and they had not considered her a physical threat, vibrated once in the pocket of the jacket. A single pulse. Not a call. A notification on the relay app. She did not reach for it. She kept her eyes on Minjun and said, "I need a moment," and walked toward the east wall, which was the only direction that took her slightly away from the main cluster of people while still keeping her in the open space rather than near any exit, and therefore the direction least likely to read as an escape attempt. She pulled the phone. 1 message, 6 words, from the clean channel. "I have him. Stall 10 more." She read it twice. She put the phone away. She turned back to the room. 10 minutes. 10 minutes between now and whatever Tae-hyun had built in the last 6. She walked back to the table. She sat down. She pulled the laptop toward her. "There's a secondary authentication layer I didn't mention," she said. "It requires a biometric confirmation that runs through a separate server. I need to initiate the handshake from my end first." The technician looked at the screen over her shoulder. She watched him read the interface. She had opened a legitimate window in the architecture. It was real. It existed. It was not the primary credential entry point, but it was plausible as a precursor step to someone who understood the system less completely than she did. The technician said something in Korean to Minjun. Minjun looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. 5 minutes, he said. "Then we do this with or without the biometric layer, and we accept the risk." She nodded. She began working. Yes. Outside, in a vehicle that had moved to a new position 2 blocks east, Tae-hyun made the call. He had spent the last 7 minutes building the specific kind of leverage that did not require a weapon to deploy, the kind that was more dangerous than a weapon because it could not be disarmed by force. What he had found in Woo Sang-chul's financial records, with the help of 2 analysts working remote and very fast, was a wire transfer series that ran through 4 intermediary accounts in 3 countries before it landed in a personal holding structure in the Cayman Islands. 14 months of deposits. Clean looking, until you knew what the deposit intervals corresponded to. They corresponded to the dates of Daesung Holdings' quarterly financial reviews. Wu had been selling internal intelligence about the task force investigation's progress to a third party for over a year. Not to Beck Dragon, to a financial competitor in the Japanese market who had been using the information to time acquisitions in the Korean logistics sector. 3 different transactions. 84 million won, total, across the 14 months. It was not the most elegant corruption Tae-hyun had ever seen, but it was documented, it was traceable, and it was enough. He dialed Woo Sang-chul's personal number. It rang 3 times. Then, "Who is this?" "You know who this is?" Tae-hyun said. "I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about it before you respond." Silence. Account ending 7741 Cayman Islands, registered under a holding structure called Meridian Consulting LLC. 14 months, quarterly intervals. He paused. "You have been in that warehouse for 40 minutes. You have been connected to this operation for at least 2 years. I have documentation of both." Another pause. "My current position gives me the option of managing this privately or making it impossible to manage at all. I would prefer the former. I think you would too." The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that Han-sol turned around from the front seat with a question on his face. Tae-hyun held up one hand without looking at him. Then Woo said very quietly, "What do you want?" "I want my people out of that building in 10 minutes, Tae-hyun said. "Unharmed. Both of them. I want Min-jun's operation dissolved before 48 hours. And I want your task force to develop an immediate and comprehensive interest in the Bake Dragon Syndicate's financial infrastructure rather than mine." He let that settle. "In exchange, the account documentation stays in my possession and does not move." Another silence. Shorter this time. "Min-jun won't accept a stand-down order from me," Woo said. "He has his own people in there." "That's not my problem," Tae-hyun said. "That's yours." He ended the call. He looked at Han-sol. "Tell the breach teams to move to secondary positions. North loading bay only, on my signal." "Not standing down?" "Standing by," Tae-hyun said. "There's a difference." Inside the warehouse, Nia was 3 minutes into her manufactured biometric sequence when Director Wu walked to the center of the room and said Min-jun's name. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Min-jun turned, Wu said something low and directed, and Min-jun's face did something controlled and rapid that she tracked from 20 feet away without being able to fully read. Whatever Wu said, it was short. Min-jun looked at him for a moment, then he looked at Nia. She kept her expression neutral and her hands on the keyboard. Min-jun walked to Wu. The conversation between them was inaudible from where she sat. They were keeping it that way deliberately, bodies angled, voices down. But she could read the body language. Wu was not suggesting, he was not explaining, he was issuing a direction from a position of authority that Min-jun was in the process of deciding whether to accept. The 8 other people in the room were reading it too. She could feel the atmospheric shift, the specific quality of a room recalibrating around a change in the power structure, everyone waiting to see which way it fell. Tae-won was watching Min-jun's face. His right wrist moved again in the restraint. Almost. Min-jun turned away from Wu and looked across the room at his 2 closest people. Not operatives on loan from Beck Dragon, she realized now, his people, the ones who had made this specific walk with him. He said 2 words. She didn't catch the words. She caught the movement that followed them. The closest operative reached for his weapon at the same moment that Jae-won's right hand came free. The chair went backward. Hae-won moved with the specific, economical violence of someone who had been holding still for 3 hours specifically, so that when he moved, he could move completely. He was across the 6 feet between himself and the nearest armed man before the man had fully cleared his holster, and then they were on the ground together, and the gun was not where it had been. The room erupted. Nia was off the chair and moving before she had made a conscious decision to move. Not toward the exit, toward the north loading bay, because that was where Tae-hyun's team was, and that was the only direction in this room that meant anything. She was crossing the warehouse floor in flat shoes on concrete, and someone was shouting behind her, and she heard the sound of 2 shots fired, but she did not know whose or at what, and she did not stop moving. She hit the manual release on the loading bay door at a dead run, both hands slamming down on the handle, and the door came up with a grinding mechanical protest that was the best sound she had heard since the green confirmation light on the relay screen. Outside. Cold air. The industrial corridor's gray daylight. brutal and clarifying after the strip lighting of the warehouse interior. 3 of Tae-hyun's men were positioned outside the loading bay. One of them caught her by the arm as she came through, a steadying grip, and she registered his face, Han Sol, Tae-hyun's driver-turned-field operative, looking at her with the compressed urgency of someone who had been told to expect her, and was relieved she had arrived on her own terms. "Chae-won," she said. She did. "Team's going in," Han Sol said. He was already moving, pulling her to the side of the doorframe, out of the line of any fire from inside. From behind her, she could hear the warehouse doing what warehouses did when the situation inside them was resolving by force, a compressed, violent efficiency of sound, controlled and directional. "Tae-hyun," she said. 30 seconds, Han Sol said. She pressed her back against the exterior wall of the warehouse and breathed. The cut on her arm was pulling. She hadn't eaten since... She couldn't remember. The morning's coffee was the last thing, and that had been cold and insufficient. Her hands were not shaking, which she noted with a detached, somewhat surprised appreciation of her own nervous system. 17 seconds after Han Sol said 30, a vehicle came around the corner of the industrial corridor at a speed that was technically legal only in the sense that it was possible without leaving the ground, and it stopped in front of the loading bay, and Kang Tae-hyun stepped out of the passenger side before it had fully stopped moving. He covered the distance between the vehicle and the wall where she was standing in 4 seconds. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her. The whole-body assessment of someone checking for damage, rapid and thorough and not particularly subtle. His eyes settled on her face. She looked back at him. "I'm fine," she said, which had become something she said reflexively in his presence, and which was approximately 60% true. "I told you 12 minutes," he said. "I got you 14. Something moved in his face. It wasn't quite the expression from the car last night, or the safe house this morning. It was more compressed, more immediate, like something that had been waiting for a specifically long time and had used up all its patience. "Chae-won," she said again, "my team is pulling him out now." His phone was already in his hand, receiving, and she could hear through it the clipped Korean of his breach team running an interior resolution with the particular efficient brevity of professionals in the late stages of a contained operation. He listened. He said 2 words. He put the phone down. "Min-jun," she said, "in custody." "Woo!" A pause. "Cooperating," he said, with a flatness that contained several layers of meaning she would need to unpack later, when there was a later. She let out a breath. "You called him?" "Yes." And he folded. "He made a practical decision," Tae-hyun said. "He's a practical man. It's the most useful thing about him." She looked at him for a moment. This man who had built an empire on the precise management of human pressure points and had deployed that skill in the last 40 minutes to extract her from a situation she had walked into on her own volition. She thought about the message. 6 words. "I have him. Stall 10 more." She thought about what it had taken to build leverage on a sitting government official in less than 7 minutes from a vehicle 2 blocks away. "How did you know about the account?" she said. "I've had a file on Woo Song-chul for 18 months, he said. "I keep files on everyone who has the institutional capacity to threaten my organization." He looked at her. "It's not admirable. It's how I've stayed alive." She absorbed that. "You had it, and you didn't use it. I was waiting to need it. And I was the thing that made you need it." He was quiet for a moment. "You were the thing that made the need immediate, yes." The loading bay behind her was active. She could hear movement, voices, the controlled aftermath of a breach operation resolving. Cold air. The industrial corridor's flat gray light. Somewhere 2 streets over, Seoul continued with its complete indifference to anything that happened inside warehouses between private parties at 11 in the morning. Then Chae-won came through the loading bay door. He was moving under his own power, one of the breach team at his shoulder without quite supporting him. The bruise on his face had company now. A cut above his right eyebrow that had bled and dried, his jacket torn at one shoulder from whatever had happened in the 30 seconds after he'd pulled his wrist free of the restraint. He came through the door and stopped when he saw Tae-hyun. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Jae-won said, in Korean, "You took your time." "You took mine," Tae-hyun said. Something that wasn't quite a smile moved across Jae-won's damaged face. He looked at Nia. He held the look for a beat. the specific quality of look she recognized as the one he reserved for situations where he was updating his assessment of something, recalibrating, filing new data in a category he had previously closed. "Ms. Okafor," he said. "You're welcome," she said. He almost smiled again. He let the breach team operative steer him toward the vehicle without further argument, which told her more about how he was actually feeling than anything he had said. Tae-hyun looked at her. She looked back at him. The adrenaline was metabolizing now, converting itself into the specific heavy exhaustion that followed it, and she could feel it moving through her legs and behind her eyes. "We need to move," he'd said. "Woo's cooperation has a window. Once his people start asking where he is—" "I know," she said. She pushed off the wall. He moved to go around her to the vehicle. She caught his arm. He stopped. She was not sure what she meant to say. She was not sure she meant to say anything. She had spent 14 minutes in a warehouse authenticating systems she had no intention of authenticating and manufacturing delays out of thin air while she waited for a man she didn't fully trust to build something that could save both of them. And he had done it. And she was standing in a gray industrial corridor in Seoul with her hand on his arm, and the feeling in her chest was not complicated anymore. It was very simple. It was just very large. "Later," she said. He understood what she meant. She could see him understand it. The particular quality of attention when something hoped for moves from possible to... The vehicle moved through the industrial corridor and Nia sat in the back seat with her shoulder against the door and watched Seoul come back into focus around her. The city reappearing in its ordinary form after the compressed, pressure-cooked version of it that the last 18 hours had produced. Tae-hyun was on the phone. He had been on the phone since they pulled away from the loading bay, a series of calls in rapid succession, each one short and directive, the low-controlled cadence of a man dismantling one situation while building another. She let the Korean wash over her without translating. She was tired in a way that had settled into her bones and was not going to be argued with. Chaewon was in the second vehicle behind them. She had watched them help him in, had watched the specific wordless way Tae-hyun had gripped his shoulder before closing the door, the grip of a man who did not have language available for what he needed to say and was using contact instead. Jaewon had said nothing. He had looked at Tae-hyun's face and then looked away, which was its own kind of answer. Tae-hyun ended the last call and put the phone in his pocket. The silence in the back seat was different from the silences they had shared in the last 18 hours. Those had been functional silences, the kind maintained because there was thinking to be done and words would have disrupted it. This one was different. It had the quality of something exhaled, a held breath released, a long-maintained tension beginning, very slowly, to unknot. "Woo," she said. "Managed," he said. Define managed. He has committed the task force's resources to a comprehensive investigation of the Beck Dragon Syndicate's financial infrastructure. He paused, voluntarily and enthusiastically, as of 40 minutes ago. "And his file?" "Stays where it is," Tae-hyun said. "Undisturbed, as long as the enthusiasm holds." She looked at him. "That's leverage you'll hold indefinitely." "Yes. You're comfortable with that." "I'm pragmatic about it," he said, with a precision that was not quite the same thing and knew it. She turned back to the window. The city moved past. Gangnam's architecture compressed and then opened out toward the river district, the Han visible in the distance through a gap between buildings, a flat silver gleam under the overcast sky. "Minjun," she said, "in my custody, not Beck Dragons, not a state facility." A pause. "Not yet." "What does not yet mean?" "It means I'm deciding," he said. "It means that 9 years is a long time and I want to understand completely before I do anything permanent." The last word carried a specific weight that she did not investigate further. "He will not be a threat to this organization or to you. That much is already resolved." She nodded. "The Beck Dragon leadership," he continued, without being asked, "is going to find the next 6 weeks operationally very difficult. Woo's task force, the evidence we've already built from the relay intercept analysis, and 3 separate financial exposure points that my team identified overnight. They'll be managing their own collapse. They won't have resources left over for us." "You worked that out while you were also extracting us from a warehouse." "I worked some of it out last night when I couldn't sleep," he said. "I finished it this morning." She looked at him. He was looking at the window on his side. The city, the same gray sky, the same indifferent river. And his profile in the flat morning light had the particular quality of someone who had passed through the acute phase of something and arrived in the aftermath, where everything was quieter and the cost became visible. Tae-hyun, she said. He turned. What happens now, she said, to the organization, to Daesung? If Wu redirects the task force, if Baked Dragon collapses, what does the next year look like? He was quiet for a moment. Restructured, he said, significantly. Minjun's role was deep. The exposure runs further than the relay access. I'll need to rebuild the inner operational layer from the ground up. He looked at his hands. It will be a different organization than it was 3 days ago. Better or worse? He seemed to consider the question with genuine seriousness. Smaller, he said. More careful. I've been running at a scale that required more trust than I could verify. He looked at her. That's a lesson I've learned expensively before and apparently needed to learn again. And the parts of it that aren't legitimate, she said. The parts I've been managing for 5 years. The silence that followed was specific. Is that a question about the organization, he said, or a question about you? Both, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the car slowed for a traffic signal, and the city held its breath around them for 10 seconds, and then the light changed and they moved again. I'm not going to tell you it stops, he said. I'm not going to make you a promise I can't keep because this morning reminded both of us what broken promises cost. He shifted, turning more fully toward her in the back seat. What I can tell you is that I want to move in that direction, genuinely and with actual structural intent. Because I'm 41 years old and I've built something significant and I'd like it to survive me. And what happened in the last 18 hours is what happens when the foundation is rotten. He paused. And because the person I most want beside me while I do that work is someone whose judgment I trust, who has, in fact, been the clearest-eyed person in my building for 5 years. She looked at him. That's not the same as a proposal, she said. No, he agreed. It's a statement of intent. The rest, he held her gaze, is yours to determine. The car pulled up outside a building she recognized. Not the safe house, not Daesung Tower. His private residence, the one she had been to exactly twice in 5 years for operational reasons. The one with the penthouse overlooking the Han River. She looked at the building. She looked at him. She said, okay. The penthouse was not what the word implied in most contexts. It was not ostentatious. It was large and high and spare, with the same functional minimalism as every space Tae-hyun controlled, as though the accumulation of objects felt to him like a vulnerability. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the riverside, furniture chosen for durability rather than statement. A kitchen that was better equipped than the safe house and showed slightly more evidence of actual use. She stood at the window while he moved through the space behind her. Jacket off, weapons set down on the kitchen counter with the specific placement of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Shoes, the jacket of the morning replaced with something from the room beyond. The Han was visible below, wide and dark silvered under the overcast. The bridges crossing it in both directions carrying the ordinary traffic of an ordinary Thursday in Seoul. From this height, the city had the quality it always had from the 53rd floor. Compressed and luminous and completely indifferent to what happened inside any individual life being lived inside it. She had looked at the city from high windows for 5 years. She heard him come back into the main room and stop. You should eat, he said. I know. I know, she said again. She didn't move from the window. Give me a minute. He gave her the minute. She was aware of him behind her. The specific quality of his stillness, which she had spent 5 years cataloging and which she now understood differently than she had 48 hours ago. Not the stillness of control or calculation. The stillness of a man waiting for something he had decided not to rush. She thought about what she was going to say. She had been composing it since the industrial corridor, in the pieces of her mind that weren't occupied with logistics and adrenaline management. She had revised it several times. What she arrived at was not elegant, but it was honest, and she had decided that with this particular man, in this particular moment, honest was the only currency that was going to hold its value. She turned around. He was standing near the kitchen counter, arms loose at his sides, watching her with the expression she had finally found a category for somewhere around 4 a.m. in a safe house room while staring at a ceiling. It was the expression of a man who understood that he had no moves left, that every form of management, every strategic approach, every layer of careful control had been stripped away by 18 hours of circumstances that didn't negotiate, and who was standing in the residue of all of that with nothing left but the actual thing. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "About the 5 years? About the men you removed?" She held up one hand before he could respond. "I was. This morning I was, and I had every right to be, but I've been sitting with it for several hours now, and what's on the other side of the anger is—" She stopped. "It's grief," she said. "For the time. For the version of the last 5 years that might have existed if you had made different choices." She paused. "And underneath the grief is something else that I've been aware of for longer than I'm going to tell you, and which I spent the last 5 years managing the same way you managed yours, by pretending it was something smaller than it was." He did not move. "I'm telling you this," she said, "because you told me the truth in that car last night, when it would have been easier not to. And because whatever we're going to be to each other going forward, I want it built on what's actually there, instead of what we've both been pretending was there." She looked at him directly. "I'm not certain about all of it. I'm not certain about the organization or what my role in it is going to look like, or whether the version of this I can live with is the version you're actually able to build. Those are real questions, and they need real answers over time." She paused. "But I'm certain about you. That part I'm certain about." The river was visible through the window behind her, broad and quiet. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, close the way he had been in the safe house kitchen this morning, close enough that she could see every line of exhaustion in his face, the toll of the last 20 hours written plainly in the set of his jaw, and the specific stripped-back quality of his eyes. He lifted one hand and held it at the side of her face without touching, a question, suspended. She turned her face into his palm. His hand was warm. She had noticed that once before, and she noticed it again now. The specific, solid warmth of it, the careful way it curved to accommodate her face, the absence of any move to manage or direct. Just holding. "I'm sorry," he said. The words had the quality of something that had been waiting for a long time and had finally found the right moment, and she understood that he was not apologizing for last night, or for the warehouse, or for any single event. He was apologizing for 5 years of making himself the architecture of her life without telling her what he was building. "I know," she said. I know it doesn't cover it," she said. "That's all right." He rested his forehead against hers. Both of them breathed. Outside, Seoul moved and glittered and carried on with the magnificent indifference of a city that had seen everything and taken notes on nothing. She put her hand over his. They slept, not romantically, practically. The exhaustion was simply too complete. She took the room he offered and slept for 4 hours in the spare, clean silence of a space that smelled faintly of the building rather than of any human habitation. And she did not dream, and when she woke, the light through the curtains had shifted to the amber of late afternoon. She lay there for a moment and took inventory. Her arm. Her legs, which ached with the particular delayed onset complaint of muscles that had been asked to sprint without warming up. The hunger that had moved past urgency into a low, constant insistence. She got up. She washed her face. She went out to the main room. Taehyun was at the kitchen counter with 2 phones and a laptop and a cup of coffee, reconstructing the world. She could see from the lines of text on the nearest screen that the organizational restructuring had already begun. Security architecture, access credentials, personnel reshuffling. The machine running on without stopping because the machine could not stop. She recognized the pace. She had supported it for 5 years. He looked up when she came in. He stood, went to the kitchen, and started cooking. Actual cooking. Eggs, rice, the components of something real. She sat at the counter and watched him do it with the mild, recurring disorientation of discovering a domestic capability in someone whose competencies she thought she had fully mapped. "You cook," she said. "My mother taught me it was a basic survival skill," he said, without looking up from the pan. She was right about most things. She hadn't known that. She had known his professional history, his criminal record where it existed in state systems, his organizational preferences and operational habits. She had not known about his mother, or what she had taught him, or what he had sounded like before he became the man she had worked beside for 5 years. She thought, there is an entire person here I haven't met yet. She thought, I have time. He set a plate in front of her. She ate. The food was simple, and it was the best thing she had tasted in memory purely by virtue of being eaten at a counter in a warm room after a long night and a longer morning. And she did not say so because it would have sounded sentimental, and she was not ready to be sentimental yet. They ate in the particular quiet of people who had run out of urgent things to say and had arrived, for the first time, in the space where the non-urgent things lived. 3 days later, Choi Jae-won came to the penthouse. The bruise on his face had matured into the yellow-green of an injury resolving, the cut above his eyebrow sealed with 2 small steri strips. He moved carefully. She suspected bruised ribs, possibly one cracked, from the way he managed the step down into the main room. But his face had the specific, tightly controlled quality of a man who was not going to discuss his physical condition with anyone who didn't have a medical degree. Tae-hyun poured 3 cups of coffee without being asked. The 3 of them sat in the main room, the Han River visible through the windows, and had the conversation that had been waiting since the warehouse. Jae-won looked at Nia first. He held the look long enough to be intentional and short enough to be respectable. "I owe you," he said. "You don't," she said. "I do," he said, in a tone that was not prepared to be argued with. "I know what it cost to walk in there. I know what you risked." He picked up his coffee cup. "I'm stating it once. I won't belabor it." She nodded. He looked at Tae-hyun. "Min-jun talked," Tae-hyun said, "extensively. I have a complete picture now of how long the arrangement with Woo had been running and who else inside the organization was aware of it." He paused. The number was small. 2 other people, both of whom have been removed. "Removed," Jae-won repeated. "Relocated," Tae-hyun said, which was not quite the same thing, and Jae-won did not push it. "Min-jun's outcome will be determined by what he does with the next 6 months. He has an arrangement. It's conditional." "You gave him a way out," Jae-won said. "Not criticism, assessment. I gave him a structure," Tae-hyun said. "Whether it's a way out depends on his choices. I'm done making other people's choices for them." He said the last sentence without inflection and did not look at Nia when he said it, but she heard the weight of it anyway. Jae-won turned his coffee cup in his hands. He looked at the river. "The rebuilding," he said. "The restructuring you've started." "Yes. You're moving away from the Eastern Distribution Network." "The Eastern Network was the thing they wanted most," Tae-hyun said, "which tells me it was also the thing most worth examining." He paused. "It's not a complete withdrawal. It's a review. What survives the review survives on different terms." Chae-won was quiet for a moment. "Different terms meaning?" "Meaning I'm not interested in running something that requires this level of violence to maintain," Tae-hyun said. "I'm 41 years old. I've spent 20 years building capacity, and the last 18 hours demonstrated very clearly what that capacity is for, at its worst. That is not—" He stopped. He looked at his coffee cup. He looked at Nia, and the look was brief, but she caught everything in it. "That is not what I want the next 20 years to be." The room absorbed that. Chae-won looked between them with the careful, measuring attention of a man who had been in proximity to Tae-hyun for 11 years and understood the magnitude of what had just been said. He did not comment on it. He was wise enough for that. "You'll need someone to run the restructuring from the operational side," Jae-won said. "I know who I need," Tae-hyun said. "I'll need 6 weeks to recover properly before I'm at full capacity." "I know," Tae-hyun said. "Take 8. Something shifted in Jae-won's face. Not quite emotion. Too contained for that, but the residue of it. He set down his coffee cup. He stood with the careful management of a man whose ribs were reminding him of their existence and declined to let it show beyond the careful management. He looked at Nia one more time. "You're staying," he said. "Not a question." "Apparently," she said. He nodded once, in the way of someone filing a significant piece of information into a category that had been previously labeled uncertain and was now being relabeled. "Good," he said, and meant it, and she believed him. He left. 2 weeks later, on a Monday morning, Nia stepped out of the executive elevator on the 53rd floor of Daesung Tower in a dress the color of dark cherries. Not the emerald, which she had retired not from trauma, but from the particular feeling that some things belong to the moment that produced them and should be left there. This was new. This was chosen in the morning with deliberate attention rather than careful planning, because the distinction between those two things had become, recently, significant. The floor had changed, not dramatically. The furniture was the same. The window light was the same. The particular quality of compressed functional intelligence that the executive level carried was the same. But the personnel had shifted. 2 familiar faces replaced by 2 new ones she was still learning to read. The security architecture had been rebuilt from the ground up. Access credentials reissued, the organizational map redrawn in ways that were still settling. Her desk was where it had always been, outside the chairman's office, close enough to hear his voice through the wall, close enough to catch the smell of his cigarette smoke in the evenings. On her desk, when she sat down, was a small box. No card. She opened it. Inside was a ring. Not ostentatious, not trying to make a statement it hadn't earned. A single stone, deep green, set in a plain band. The color of the dress she had worn on Friday evening, 3 weeks and several lifetimes ago. She sat with it for a moment. The chairman's office door was closed. She could hear him through the wall. The measured pace of a man in an early meeting. The particular cadence of someone managing a conversation toward an outcome he had already decided on. The ordinary music of a building that was still standing, still running, still building something on ground that had been cleared by fire and was only now beginning to show what would grow there. She put the ring on. She turned on her screen. She started work. At 9:15, the chairman's office door opened. Taehyun stepped out to get the morning briefing. His first coffee, the overnight correspondence summary, the operational digest that she had been producing every morning for 5 years and which had changed in content but not in fundamental purpose. He stopped when he saw the ring. She looked up from her screen. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. The expression on his was the same one she had found a category for in a safe house room at 4 in the morning, but it had lost the careful compression of something that couldn't be acknowledged yet. It was just itself, open and real and slightly undone, in the way that the things that matter most are always slightly undone when they finally land. "The stone," she said, "took you a while to decide on it." "I spent 4 days on it," he said. 4 days. "The first 3 choices were wrong," he said. "I wanted to get it right." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about 5 years of mornings at this desk and 5 years of that door and everything that had accumulated in the space between without being named, the weight of it, the waste of it, and also, underneath both, the strange and stubborn truth that none of it had diminished anything. That whatever this was had survived 5 years of being managed into silence and 1 very long night of being put under every kind of pressure that could have broken it, and it was still here. Sitting at a desk at 9:15 on a Monday morning, drinking cold coffee, answering the correspondence of an empire that was learning, slowly and at significant cost, to be something other than what it had been. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. He took the briefing folder from her desk. He went back to his office. The door stayed open. Outside the window, Seoul carried on, vast and bright and indifferent and full of the particular noise of a city that neither forgave nor condemned, but simply moved forward, which was the only direction any of them had ever had. She turned back to her screen. She started the day.